Hello, and welcome to A Plus College Ready E3 virtual training. I'm Jennifer Dassinger, and with the help of my moderator, Kelly Wade, we want this training to be as effective as if it were in person. Danny Elegante and myself have spent numerous hours preparing resources, creating videos, and organizing lessons which will equip you on how to implement the 5E active learning model of instruction. Through Danny Elegante, Kelly Wade, and myself, we have years of experience on what has worked in the classroom and what has not worked in the classroom. Our vision for this training is for you to be empowered with the mindset of being an instructional coach with a student-centered focus. The lessons really do work. They encompass all aspects of the 5E learning model of engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. Our overarching goal for this training is to equip you with the data-driven sources, empower you with Marzano teaching strategies so that you can expect more from your students. The 5E model: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. It's a research-based active learning cycle, which I will break down for you in the following PowerPoint. The first phase of our 5E model is engage. So students should be able to focus on a problem, a situation, an event, and make connections based upon prior knowledge to the task at hand. It may be something conceptual, something procedural, or something behavioral. Now, when trying to classify activities, if they fall into an engage category, do they make connections to the past, to the future? Do they ask a question? Do they define a problem? Do they show a discrepant event? Do they act out a problematic situation? So you in this role will present the activity, the situation, identify the instructional task at hand, set clearly defined rules and procedures for the activity. So here's an engage rubric for you to be able to utilize to classify your activities and your instruction. So it's broken down into two parts. What does the student do? And what do you do as the teacher? So is it consistent with the engage model or is it not? So this is just a great overview for you to be able to refer to when looking at future model planning. So here are the criteria that an engage activity should fall upon and ensure that the students are being the center of their learning. So you are taking a back role in terms of more coaching and instructional format versus a direct instruction from out this model. Explore is intentional instruction. So this is a little bit more heavy-handed in terms of the 5E model. This, of course, occurs after the students have been engaged. So if you notice the big idea of what the students will be able to do, they will build continuously on concepts, processes, and skills they've been previously engaged in. And they'll try to observe, make these patterns aware, identify the variables at hand, and question what events are occurring. So in the activities, the students will be able to have concrete and meaningful ideas formulating in their mind. They'll have to tie in their student mental capacity along with some kind of physical movement. Now, you as the teacher have a little bit more role in this part of the 5E model, and that you are to discuss any area of specific concepts, processes, or skills. And this is more of a substantive concept building. Again, you act as a facilitator, coach. You're initiating the activity, so there will, of course, be some background rules, guidelines. You'll have to, of course, organize the materials, allow them to have time to investigate the materials, the situations, and the ideas on their own, and any phenomenon that they feel is important to this process. So again, in your lesson planning, what does an explore activity look like or exercise? Here's this rubric broken down for you of what the student should do, what you should do, and what is not consistent with the model. The big idea of the criteria for an explore activity is that you provide all your students with a common base of experience, which current concepts, processes, and skills are going to be identified and developed. You're going to provide opportunities for them to probe, inquire, and question the experiences which they are involved in an explore activity. We've now reached the explain part of our 5E model. An explanation means that the act or the process of which these concepts, the processes, or skills become plain, comprehensible, and clear. So students should be able to provide common use of terms, relate them to the learning experience as they have previously experienced in the engage and the explore. The key to this phase is to present those concepts, processes, or skills briefly, clearly, simply, and directly. Then ensure and connect them to the next phase of learning. You as a teacher have more direct attention and specific engagement than you did when you were in the exploration and the engagement part of the learning model. This is where your quality questioning is going to come into play. Now, this explanation can be either through direct instruction and in a formal manner, or it can be in an informal manner in group work or partner pair work. So here's an explanation rubric for what the student does that is consistent with the model and what the teacher does that is consistent. The big part that I want you to be able to see from this rubric in particular is your teacher job of asking for justification, evidence, and clarification from your students. This is your main job during this portion of the 5E model, and in my experience can be one of the most challenging to help students either verbally, written, communicate what the evidence is and be able to back that evidence up with some kind of justification in their knowledge. The big idea from the explain activities criteria that I would like you to look at is the first bullet. Focus the student's attention on a particular aspect of their engagement and exploration experience. So you're honing in on what really is the claim or the question at hand for them to be able to use to be able to write, for example, a CER, a claim, an evidence, and a reasoning behind what they've discovered. So provides opportunities for you as the teacher to introduce this concept in terms of their turning their learning around back to you and to be able to present it to others. The next phase of the 5E model is crucial in the student learning to get them across that finish line. The students have to have an explanation of their learning based upon what they have experienced in the elaborate, engage, explore, and explain portion. So you may have to do some more elaborations. This is very common in this phase where you're going to notice that students still may have misconceptions and or only understand a small portion of the lab skill or the skill or problem that they're experiencing. So this is an area where you have to provide further time and experience to contribute to their learning. You may need to provide more practice, you as the teacher. You may have to stop, do some direct instruction, or you may have to do tier intervention strategies of pulling individuals aside and going over some of that context in which you're trying to get them to learn and master the learning targets or goals of the lesson. In the Elaborate rubric, I want to point out a couple of things that I've learned over my years of experience of teaching. So if you notice of what the student does that is inconsistent with the model, when I first started teaching many years ago, I would have students at the end of a lab experience or with presenting with a scientific problem or issue or a science article. And at the end, they really didn't understand what the goal was. They didn't understand what evidence they had collected and why, and they weren't really able to discuss the learning targets and objectives that I had laid out for them. So this portion, the Elaborate rubric, is very crucial, and this is what I like to look at more so than any other rubric because I fell short on this aspect of my teaching in the early years as a teacher. So I really hone in on, am I just lecturing? Am I just defining answers? No. I need to remind them of alternative ways they can explain their evidence. I need to encourage them and apply the concepts that they used and learned to the new situations. So I'm constantly bringing them back to prior knowledge that they have and reminding them that they can figure this out. We talk about a concept called productive struggle throughout this training. And productive struggle is something that each student has to have in order to understand and internalize their own learning. In the criteria for an elaborate activity, a lot of teachers, and including myself, I truly mean this, I fell short in this aspect when I thought, well, I was a challenging teacher. I challenged my students. We hear that quite often. However, challenging your students without being able to have them conceptually connect their understanding and skills in their prior learning process is just challenging them. And you're going to wind up with students who are going to get frustrated, they're going to get angry, and they're going to lash out at you and possibly their parents. So this is a fine line with a challenge, but yet provide them with guidance so that they can have that new experience and develop deeper and broader understanding for themselves and to develop their own learning skills. The final phase of the 5E model is evaluate. And I think a lot of teachers, including myself, when we hear that word evaluation, we think test. But that's not necessarily what an evaluation component is. It is important for the students to receive feedback from you on the inadequacies of their learning and provide them opportunities to go back and re-explain their learning in better terminology. So this really provides the opportunity for students to be able to self-evaluate and to be able to understand what they have learned. So an evaluation can be informal. So throughout this whole process, you are walking along with your students as that instructional coach from beginning of that engage part of the teaching sequence. Then, formally and only at the end of a complete instructional cycle, when you are sure that your students are proficient in the content, should you then give a formal assessment of some kind. So if you look at the teacher responsibilities, you have to determine whether your students have met these performance indicators. If they haven't at this phase, it's not that you're a terrible teacher, it's just that you have to go back and do some reteaching, scaffolding of the knowledge so that they can feel accomplished and they feel confident in their learning. So if you notice in the evaluation rubric, what should a student be able to do? They should be able to answer open-ended questions with a depth of knowledge, providing evidence, and previously accepted explanation. So this is why we're going to elaborate more throughout our training on a claim, evidence, and reasoning. That reasoning component is crucial to the evaluation of their knowledge. And as a teacher, we don't test them on vocabulary words. It's just regurgitation of knowledge. What we will is give them those vocabulary terms and how are they used in context. So then they can create their own understanding. We make sure that they look for the evidence and challenge them to think beyond. My students always critique me and criticize me for saying, why? Because I ask why and what and how and when and where did all this occur. Make sure you have those why questions ready. And finally, the criteria for an evaluate activity should encourage those students to assess their understanding and their abilities and provide them opportunities so that they can tell their teachers their own progress in learning. They can demonstrate that this new concept or observation can be answered in an open-ended question. So as we hear Dr. Phil say all the time, growth in their learning, these proficiency charts and proficiency scales are so vital to have students